Hello and welcome to this Telberg Foundation webinar on Iran and Israel. What next? Roughly 6 weeks ago, the two Middle East powers whom everyone feared might someday go to war actually went to war. After 12 days of fighting, mostly deadly exchanges of missiles, drones, and air power, Iran and Israel agreed to a ceasefire on June 24th. But peace is an elusive concept in the Middle East, even more so these days. Will the ceasefire continue to hold? If it does, what are the likely consequences? If it doesn't, who would break it? Western pundits briefly speculated about regime change in Iran, despite the obvious surge of national pride on the streets of Tehran and elsewhere throughout the country. Similarly, some analysts immediately concluded that Prime Minister Netanyahu, having slayed or at least wounded all the dragons in sight, would finally be forced from office, although he obviously has more political lives than that proverbial cat with only 9. And what of the ordinary people, Iranians, Israelis, Palestinians, who must be beyond exhausted by seemingly endless death and destruction and fear of yet more? Indeed, I hope today's conversation will mostly be about people and politics and not about geopolitics, but we'll see where it goes. To that end, I've invited 3 people who are deeply knowledgeable about the situation. Each of them bring a unique perspective. Francesca Borri is an Italian journalist who has spent much of the last decade and more, I think, at this point, living now in Jenin and reporting from the West Bank, from Israel, from Syria, from other places. Ambassador Hossein Mousavian, a former senior Iranian diplomat who now teaches at Princeton University, and Abraham Silver, a lecturer at the Hebrew University on the architecture of Jerusalem. Today's format is simple. We're going to have a conversation among the 4 of us. As we talk, I hope you, the audience, will submit questions to the Q&A. We'll talk for about, the whole program should be about 75 minutes. We'll go as long as we have a good conversation. I am hoping that the conversation provokes you. That said, speaking of provocation, I have one caveat. Everybody knows Chatham House rules. Telberg rules are much simpler. The only rule, you can discuss anything, but we need to discuss everything respectfully, and that includes the audience. Now, let me start from 50,000 feet. What has this war done to Iranians, to Israelis, to Palestinians? What are the realities on the ground as we sit here a couple weeks after the war has at least paused? Hussein, to start?
Yes. Of course, the Israeli-US attack on Iran was really shocking for the officials and the people of Iran. Frankly speaking, they didn't expect it. Nevertheless, since the issue or the pretext was about the nuclear, first of all, I want to list some of the consequences on the nuclear issue. First is about NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. Since Revolution 1980, there was 2 schools of thought in Iran, one pro-Iran member of NPT and one against. They have been challenging each other for decades, but now I think there is more consensus among all politicians and even the people of Iran that NPT does not serve the national interest of Iran. And regardless of how far you cooperate with Iran, with the IAEA, or implement your commitments within NPT, they will use NPT as an instrument to impose sanctions and pressures, because these days or recent years, the issue has been about enrichment. But we all remember after Revolution 1980, 1979, for 15 years, when Iran did not have enrichment, Iran did not have heavy water, Iran did not have any ambitious nuclear project, the US-Israeli position was the same. Iranian nuclear program is threat to international peace and security, and since 1991, even the time Iran did not have enrichment, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been each year repeating that Iran is going to get nuclear bomb within a year. And that's why I think there is now more consensus that countries like Israel, like India, like Pakistan, which they have nuclear bomb and they have not accepted NPT, they are right, and NPT really does not help Iran. This is number one. Of course, there would not be immediate reaction from the politicians. They would be patient to see what would be the final outcome of the negotiations. But nevertheless, reformists, the moderates now, they are almost convinced that the issue is not about NPT. The second consequences is about Iran and the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. Again, we have had the two schools of thought during the last 40, 45 years, but now there is more consensus even within moderates and reformists that the IAEA is just a political tool, spying tool for the West, for the US, for Israel to put pressures and sanctions and manufacture documents against Iran. And especially the time IAEA adopted the last resolution on June 12, it was exactly the same time when Israelis, they were loading their bombs to attack Iran. And this coincidence, this timing has been discussed a lot in Iranian media between the people, even officials, that the IAEA passed exactly the time before the time Israelis and Americans, they have coordinated and prepared attacking on Iran. The third consequences, negative consequences, I would say, is about weapons of mass destruction. Again, we have had for 40 years the same two schools of thought, one pro-Iran being member of all weapons of mass destruction, and the other opposing. But these days, there is at least a big doubt whether really Iran continue to be member of weapons of mass destruction conventions would serve Iran national interest or not. Because although there is always question about Iranian nuclear ambiguities or technical issues, Iran has been member of chemical weapon conventions, biological weapon conventions, fully committed, fully complied, no claim, but Iran has been deprived from peaceful chemical technology, peaceful biological technology for decades. Therefore, in every conventions, there are rights versus commitments. And for Iran is only commitments, no rights, whether this is nuclear or chemical or biological.
Hussein, let me interrupt and bring in Abraham and how things post-war look in Israel.
So I'm here in Israel. First of all, Alan, thank you very much for inviting me to this platform, and Francesca and Hussein, it's nice to meet you. Here in Israel, we saw the Iranian threat as existential. We saw it on two different levels of existential. One, which is Hussein is talking about, on that level of nuclear, and the other one was on ballistic missiles. And that fear that was hanging over us, we, to a certain extent, in the aftermath of the war, feel a little bit alleviated from that fear. I don't want to overstate that. It's not as if those fears have gone away, but alleviated from an immediate threat of that. And so I think for Israelis in general, in the last few weeks post the end of the ceasefire or the end of the active war, there's been a sense of relief here, and I think that that's kind of where we're at right now. How is everything going to play moving forward is obviously the conversation, but for the moment, there in Israel, there's a sense of relief over the existential Iranian threat being at least diverted for the moment.
Francesca, you're reporting from various places in the region. How do you think about, what are you hearing from Israelis, from Palestinians, from a journalist point of view, post-war?
Palestinians are where they've been since October 7th or so. In Gaza, Palestinians are getting killed. And in the West Bank, Palestinians are trying to leave as much as possible, forced out by settler attacks, IDF raids, and the economic crisis, by poverty. And there is no international law, there is no international action, there is no Palestinian leadership, and there's no Israeli awareness of what's really happening in Gaza. There's denial, basically, and there is just Netanyahu. And there are no Palestinians except, underground.
Hossein, you started by talking about the diplomatic situation and the systematic, from your point of view, discovery that the various conventions have been, as you said, working against Iran, obligations, not rights. We are where we are, though. We've had this war. There was a lot of destruction. Either in political terms or from the point of view of Iranian citizens. What do you expect? What happens next?
The Iranian domestic situation economically, Alan, is very bad. It is not just because of the recent war. Of course, this has been deteriorated, but it is for at least 2 decades, especially after the presidency of Ahmadinejad, has become worse and worse. Therefore, the main Iranian complaint, the Iranian nation, is about the economic situation, the main and the most important issue. Nevertheless, the war impacted Iranian nation a little bit different what Bibi Netanyahu and even Americans and Westerners, they expected. They were thinking if there would be attack on Iran, the people would support the attack, they would go for regime change, they would uprising. And so it was completely vice versa, because the nation felt the issue really is about Iran, not about the Islamic Republic. And they all get united. They got united to resist the Israeli-American strike on Iran. This was perhaps for the first time during the last 20, 30 years, we had almost a united nation. The nation was very united to resist the aggression of Iran. The second is about disappointment between the people about the usefulness of negotiating with the US, because they were during negotiating. First of all, they negotiated JCPOA, Iran accepted, UN passed resolution, Iran was in full compliance, and the US withdrew. Second, again, in the second presidency term of Trump, Iran accepted to negotiate. Actually, there was agreement between Witkoff and Araqchi on the most important principles of the deal, but because of Israeli pressure, we had a setback. And then exactly 2 days before the 6th round of negotiations agreed between Witkoff and Araqchi, Israel attacked Iran. And exactly on the same day, Iran and European ministers, they were negotiating, the US attacked Iran. Therefore, now many people, I would not say completely, but a big portion of the nation, they really believe this round of negotiations at least has been a trap to engage Iran in a negotiation and prepare attacking Iran. Therefore, I would say more than ever, there is disappointment between the Iranian nation and even officials that there is no hope for negotiating with US, Europe, the West in order to have a fair deal, especially when President Trump said Iran should negotiate and with unconditional surrender. This wording was, extremely negative. It had extremely negative impact on Iranian nation. A US president asking Iran to negotiate an unconditional surrender. Otherwise, you would be attacked. Therefore, this also has been a very bad consequences, because always, I mean, at least reformists and moderates, they have been supporting negotiating with the US. Even they have been supporting the Israeli-Iranian conflict should be ended. There is no need to continue hostilities with Israel. But now we have negative consequences.
Abraham, I read something you wrote, and I'd like you to tell the story, not me, because it goes to this unity point. You wrote about that first night of the attack on of the Iranian missiles coming into Israel, that you were sitting in a shelter with your kids, and you made the comparison to the first time when they were in first grade and now they're graduating from high school. Can you just repeat the anecdote?
Yeah, I think that it moves towards a greater understanding in terms of the way Israel has seen this entire conflict, this recent conflict, and that is that obviously the conflict is the Gaza conflict with all of the issues of the Gaza conflict. But as time progressed through the Gaza conflict, it became clear that there was Hezbollah as well. And Hezbollah was this threat on the other side of the country. And then it became clear as that developed that behind Hezbollah and Hamas was actually Iran, that the real threat was Iran. And without going through the entire, year and a half of different stages of the war, it became clear to Israelis that the war was never going to really be resolved until the existential threat from Iran had been taken care of. And that's what I was writing about, which is that, hey, wait a minute, we started sitting in bomb shelters as Israelis when the girls were in first grade, 2014, if I remember right. And now we were sitting in bomb shelters again with the Iran conflict, and maybe this would be the last time. Maybe the world could change because of this, and we wouldn't be going to bomb shelters anymore. And maybe when they get married, we won't be running to bomb shelters. So I think that for Israelis, there was this real strong understanding that we were peeling away the onion, and eventually we needed to get to the core, which was the existential threat of Iran. And once again, as I said, in the 12-day war, Israelis feel that we at least have deflected that existential threat for the moment. The question really that we should be putting on the table is, what now moving forward? How does that work? But for the moment, we feel a little bit relieved from that. It was always going to be about Iran. And I will say this emotionally, which is that in October, when the events happened in October, that there was a tit for tat between Iran and Israel. The public, not the military, but the public was like, wait, why'd we stop? We need to take care of this existential threat. Why'd we stop? We now understand that the military was planning what Hussein kind of very much just laid out, what happened in June. But for the public was a little frustrated that we stopped, in spite of being exhausted about war, in spite of being in the bomb shelters. The public had this feeling of, there's only one way forward here, and that is to directly encounter Iran. And again, the military obviously was figuring that out itself, but we, to a certain extent, not relating to Gaza and Hamas and the Palestinians, which of course is the front and center thing, obviously, but in terms of Iran, feeling like we did deflect that existential concept, that existential threat. So.
Sir Abraham asked, what next? Francesca, what next?
Well, it's without Iran, basically Iran made October 7 possible, because it founded Hamas, it founded Islamic Jihad, and then now you have, this analysis, what's happening between Israel and Iran, the analysis, of Hussein and the word Palestinians. Palestinians are not even mentioned, and rightly so, because they are out of the equation. They don't matter. So of course, you can have the full analysis without even mentioning Gaza or Palestinians. And the point is, Palestinians, of course, never counted on Iran for their freedom, because, we all know that Iran has a plays a special role, in the Middle East. It's a special country because it's one of the 3 non-Arab countries, so it's a little bit different from others. And for example, in the past, it's been closer to Israel than, I don't know, to Iraq under Saddam Hussein, of course, And the point is, maybe, rightly after October 7th, perhaps, Palestinians were waiting in the list, waiting to see what Hezbollah could do, or, not Iran, but at least Hezbollah. And then when there was, I remember I was in Nablus when there was, beginning of November 2023, the famous speech of Nasrallah, where basically Nasrallah said, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to join, really, the war. Palestinians realized, that they were basically alone, just a tool, for Arab countries, and especially a tool for Iran, and so what's next? Nothing that is related to Palestinians. What's next is the end game, as both our, of course, Israeli friend and, Iranian friend knows very well, both Avram and Hussein. The end game is about Iran, So Netanyahu wants, and actually I would say the majority of Israelis agree with Netanyahu. Israel wants a regime change in Iran, and of course Iran is trying, to resist. Even if I guess there is a difference between this government in Iran and the society, which seems to be not really behind the government, behind the Ayatollah. We will see what happens. But what's next? Nothing that has to do with Palestinians, nothing. So if Hamas, if the aim of October 7 was, to have Palestinians back again, in the map, in the media, in the world agenda, nothing. Palestinians totally disappeared physically and politically. So what's next? What's next? Nothing that has to do with Palestinians.
Hussein, what's next for Iran? You talked about some of the lessons that the elite have learned, that the government has learned, some of the lessons that people have learned. There certainly has been a visible coming together. You talked about unity. Does the leadership, what does the leadership do with that unity going forward? Because it is a change.
It depends, Alan. I think there is really a need for major changes in Iranian government's policy on domestic issues and foreign relation, regional issues, even relation with the West, whether the establishment, the leadership would decide for such a major decisions or not, I really don't know, but I don't believe small steps would help. And I have been saying for years, at least for 5-6 years, that the Iranian leadership needs to take a very brave and great major decisions on not only foreign policy, not only in relation with the US or the West or the region, but a domestic situation, not only economic situation, on other issues, cultural, social issues. I really don't know whether they would use this momentum to make such a decisions or not. If not, I don't believe there would be any breakthrough in Iranian domestic situation. Nevertheless, if there is a success in negotiating with the US, if there would be a solution on the nuclear, there would be a chance for Iran and the US to negotiate on the regional issues. And I think the US is in position to bring an end to Iranian-Israeli hostilities, which I have been calling and writing and saying for several years. Otherwise, everything would go in bad direction.
So I'll say what's next also for us, which I think, first of all, I think Francesca is spot on. one of the tragedies of the fact that eventually it became the Iran war was sidelining the Palestinians and making them voiceless again. And that is just a horrible position for the Middle East to be in. And that is a little bit of where we're at. So just straight up, first of all, that's part of the equation right now. In terms of the Israelis, domestically and then foreign policy, or more military, I think the war did something which I know that Israel sometimes has the image of just powerful Israel, but Israel, in its own understanding of self, has often been responsive as opposed to responding to things that were happening rather than taking charge of things that were happening. And I think that this should be a fear for everyone, that Israel has drawn a conclusion, I think for the first time in its existence, that the way forward is to just be powerfully offensive, meaning anyone blinks in the wrong direction, then the Israelis are going to encounter them. And I think you saw that in southern Syria in a way that I think that before October 7th and before June 12th, Israel would never have done. And I think what's next in the Middle East is to be concerned about Israel in terms of what Hussein just said is really great, which is that there needs to be a negotiated settlement, and quickly, because the Israelis, to a certain extent, are unleashed. And I think that could be dangerous for the Middle East. In terms of domestically for Israel, if you noticed, what had happened was that Netanyahu was so proud of himself in terms of the Iran war. They were talking within the 24 hours after the ceasefire that they would go to snap elections, because after all, now he would win this major victory. And then the poll came out 2 days later, and the polls hadn't moved. Nobody was interested. Nobody thought that because he won, the people that support him, the people that are against him are against him. He cannot get a majority in the next election, and none of the polls moved, and the polls haven't moved since then either. So we are in that same stalemate. He didn't convince anybody. Just because we went to war with Iran didn't make him the great hero. In the people that support him, he was already that. And the people that despise him, which is a majority of the country, he was never going to be that. So domestically in Israel, we are still rifted and divided, and nothing has happened to change that.
And the danger, to follow up on that question immediately, is that if that's the case, then isn't that a formula for the government to do more of the same?
The answer is not exactly, which is that we're going to need to have new elections soon, meaning we're moving towards new elections, the date of new elections. The government, when that happens, we'll be in election mode. If no one gets a majority, the government's caretaker. The government is limited what it could do legally as a caretaker government. We could be in a sense, Alan, a little bit of a worse situation, which is we can be coasting for another 2 or 3 years of elections that are stalemated again, where we don't really do anything. And there can't be a real government policy, not legally, in terms of the way our system works. So I think that in itself is a challenge. But I also think what I said previously is also a challenge. Hey, get a negotiated settlement now. The world needs to be involved now, because Israel has changed its way of looking at things. And we're not going to let anyone rebuild. We're not going to let anyone become a threat. We will take care of that first. And that is not good for the peace of the world.
Francesca, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I have to ask Hussein, you were a diplomat for a long time. What Abraham just described doesn't sound like the basis of much of a negotiation. How do you negotiate? How does Iran negotiate with Israel if Israel has now decided that it has to slay the dragon every time a dragon raises its head? And it has the capacity to do so. As you said, Abraham, unleashed.
See, Alan, there are some facts which we really cannot deny or neglect. One fact is what General Wellesley Clark, the former NATO commander, revealed in year 2000, that Pentagon has a plan to attack 7 countries. And by now, all 7 has been attacked. 6 of them before Iranian attack were already attacked, and Iran was the last one. I mean, this was not Iranian official or someone non-official. It was the former commander, American commander of NATO, saying that it has been a plan by Pentagon to attack 7 countries. and therefore using the WMD pretext to attack Israel or nuclear to attack Iran. I mean, if this is the case, if really this is the case and behind the scene the decision already is taken, there is no use for diplomacy and negotiations. And the second fact, when we are talking about Israel, Abraham, I think you will agree with me that since 1947, 48, we have had about 400 UN resolutions, either by UN Assembly General or General Assembly or by United Nations Security Council, and Israel has violated overwhelming majority of them, especially about the two-state solution. If there is going to be a solution, it should be based on two-state solutions. This is for 78 years, overwhelming majority of international countries, over 190 countries, they are supporting two-state solution, but the US and Israel are opposing. Therefore, is there going to be any solution on Palestinian-Israeli crisis after 8 years? It depends whether the US or Israel would respect UN resolutions and the international laws and regulations and would accept the two-state. If there is going to only one state, then you can imagine the resistance would continue, whether Iran is supporting or not. We should not forget, before revolution, clashes between Israel and Palestinians with Fatah, Yasser Arafat was much more than with Hamas. In that time, Shah had a good relation with the Israeli ambassador. The Israeli ambassador was in Tehran. I mean, the Shah was US allies, but we had the same conflict even before revolution. Therefore, we need to see the requirements of diplomacy to be successful. For Iran and Israel, I think they both need to come to a conclusion that they need to respect the international laws and principles, not threatening the existence of each other, not interfering, respecting the integrity and sovereignty of each other. This is UN Charter. I mean, and both they have violated. It has not been Iran. Iran in the slogan has been more powerful than Israel, threatening the existence of Israel. But in practice, frankly speaking, Israelis, they have been more powerful to threaten the Iranian existence. And they do not talk, but they act. That's why we need to pay attention to the principles Iran, Israel, the US, or even the regional powers, international powers, they need to respect to come to a successful negotiation. And this is international laws, regulations, and UN Charter. As long as we have a country like the US does not, or Israel does not respect UN resolutions, and unilaterally they decide to attack this country or that country, of course, they have to have some reasons and to discuss about different reasons. In Iraq, there is WMD. Iran is going to make nuclear bomb, or Saddam. Even you remember Libya. I mean, when they negotiated with Gaddafi, when Gaddafi gave up every nuclear facilities or technology or equipment, then they attacked. Therefore, it really didn't matter whether Gaddafi had nuclear capability or not. I mean, I really don't know what is the bottom line of the US.
Francesca, the argument was just made that absent two-state solution, this conflict continues in some form or the other forever. Do you agree?
The two states, I mean, where a Palestinian state should be. Where? There is no West Bank anymore already now. Really, there is no West Bank. I mean, just walk around, drive around, and settlements are everywhere, everywhere. And Gaza, well, look at the rubble of Gaza. So the point is not, just two states or one state. It's the way you live, regardless of how many states. That's the point. I think, it's not about one state, two states, three states, or even the 10 states, that Israel is trying to set up probably in the West Bank now with these tribal leaders. So one state for every city. No, it's about, it's about the leadership. I belong to the generation of the Arab Spring. So we have really a leadership issue everywhere. In Israel, of course, in Palestine, of course, in Iran, I would say, because of course, Iran calls Israel, to respect international law, rightly so. But, I was in Syria all the war. What about Iran and international law? What about Iran and Syrians, Iran, so I think it's a matter of leadership now, and from new leaderships, you can have creative solutions. Also because, I spend most of my time in Jenin. And in Jenin, the young Palestinians in Jenin always say that somehow, this is a war of the last century. This is a war, for states, nation states, a war for flags, really, this is not a war of our generation. Our generation is used to travel and to have no borders, Of course, you need to have a passport and you need to have, a state to be able to travel. But, we might think of different solutions, think of the European Union, I think that leaderships now come before, this debate about one state, two states, or for now we have 0 states, honestly.
And the clear question is still, what next? If we have Israel going into elections, so won't do anything. In Iran, Hussein, obviously there's going to be a transition at some point. The supreme leader is old, and everyone waits for that transformation. You don't have elections for a while, but a far more important transition coming up. It would be really easy to come away from the conversation so far completely depressed. That is to say that there isn't a basis for Iran and Israel to figure out how to live together. At least that's what I've heard so far. So why am I wrong on that?
I'm going to start a little bit with the local before the global,
Please.
And that is what Francesca was saying. I think that I think we've always been trapped here and we need vision. And what Francesca, I believe, is saying is that where's the vision? Where's the young leadership to see things in a different way? Like her reference to the EU. If the world would take charge, and I don't mean that it's the responsibility of anyone except for us, except for we're not getting it done. Right now in Israel, the prevalent understanding of the world in the local is, hey, what do you want us to do? Look at what happened in Gaza. Look at that existential threat that happened in Gaza. And now what should we do with the West Bank? And I think that if we had better vision, rebuilding Gaza, coming in as a global community, and saying we're going to affect change in Gaza for the positive, for all of those poor people that are suffering, for the positive, over a X amount of year period, we could create something great and dynamic with a better future for the people in Gaza. And then the Israelis will turn around and say, hey, how could we not do that in the West Bank as well? Look how great it's worked in Gaza. Instead of being afraid of the West Bank because of what's happened in Gaza, I think that there's an opportunity right now, if the world will seize that opportunity, to create a better world for all of us. In terms of Iran, I think that suits that position as well. I don't want to be pessimistic. What I think I was saying was that we are not going to allow danger to fester against us. But that doesn't mean that Israel, doesn't have the opportunity to say, wait a minute, if someone wants to reach out their hand, then we can reach out our hand back. And again, I think the problem for the Middle East really is that everyone reacts to what's going on as if they're the victim, as if they're afraid. And I think that everyone has a right to feel that way. But the question really is, can the global community come in and hold our hands respectfully, all of our hands, and say, hey, I understand why you're afraid. Let's walk forward together. Because Palestinians have every right to be afraid, and the Israelis have every right to be afraid. And as Hussein explained, the Iranians have every right to be afraid. Okay, how do you break that fear? No one's going to react positively from a position of fear. They have to react positively from a position of encouragement. Who in the world can sit down and say to all of us, I understand what you're saying, and I feel for you. Now let's move forward together. So I don't think that it's pessimistic. I think we just need to find that global leadership that has the ability to see that there's a better future for all of us.
Color me skeptical about global leadership being any better than, as Francesca describes, local leadership. And isn't that almost a cry for help? We can't solve our own problems, so couldn't someone come down and solve all this for us? I was saying, you've been arguing that the diplomatic channels have produced not what they should have produced. What would you do differently going forward?
As I said, Alan, I really don't know what is the criteria, whether criteria is international law regulations or the US-Israel law regulations. I mean, if the criteria is about international law, when we are talking about NPT, Witkoff, Araqchi, in the first 2-3 rounds, they had 3 major agreements. One was for Iran to export all 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. I mean, all the claims or fear was that Iran has 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, and they can make 10 nuclear bombs. And Iran accepted to export or to dilute. The second was about the level of enrichment. The question always has been why Iran needs 20% or 60%. Iran accepted to go to civilian enrichment below 5%. And the other concern was about Iran cooperation with the IAEA. Iran accepted to have the highest level of transparency and cooperation with the IAEA to remove every ambiguities of the IAEA, even to implement the additional protocols. Therefore, the 3 major concerns within the framework of NPT was agreed. And then Iran was attacked. I really don't believe Israel or the US. They respect non-proliferation treaty. They don't care. I mean, you can understand. You can see. They don't care about non-proliferation. That's why Israel, with at least 90 nuclear bombs, now is claiming that is fighting for non-proliferation in the Middle East. Israel is the only country in the Middle East with nuclear weapon. Is attacking Iran or Iraq and the other countries which they are member of NPT and they don't have nuclear weapon. I mean, as long as we don't agree on the principles and the criteria, we cannot find any solution.
Francesca, before we started, you were talking off camera about trust. And to the point that I think both Abraham and Hussein have just made, there is no trust. Obviously, there's no trust between Israel and Iran. There's not much trust for anyone in the Middle East on any subject, put aside the United States, which certainly suffers from that same deficit of trust. How do you change that? Is it changeable?
Look, but because we are all stuck, on October 7th, I mean, for all of us in Israel and Palestine, both sides of the wall, is still October 7th. And really, on a personal level, I think if you ask each of us, we are probably not talking to whoever is, out of Israel and Palestine, because we all think, no one can understand unless, he's here. And the point is, at some point, sooner or later, October 7th will be over, and we will all start to process what happened, both Israelis and Palestinians. And so, of course, we will have change. I totally agree with Abraham. I mean, I see an opportunity somehow this is a little bit like before the Arab Spring, when really the gap between, the society and the leadership is too wide, and it's a young society, So we are speaking of uranium, and think of my generation. Well, we are speaking actually of lithium, for we are focused on solar energy, on the energy transition. Uranium and nuclear weapons are really, a debate that, we studied in history books, for our university exams. Sounds like, the Soviet Union is back again speaking of nuclear weapons. I mean, we are not interested in uranium. We are interested, in our future. So that's the point, when the gap is so wide, I expect the unexpected, I expect the black swan, basically. And I expect, Israelis and Palestinians to find a common ground. We usually, know each other, help each other, and as soon as the world around forgets us, we basically share the same land. So definitely, this will be an opportunity as soon as we start to process what happened. For now, nobody's processing anything because we are living in an emergency day by day. But as soon, when probably there will be new elections in Israel or a government change in Tehran, as soon as there will be, an end somehow to the active fighting, to the active war, we will start process what happened, and there will be change, no doubt.
Abraham, can you imagine ways to develop trust with Iran, Israeli trust with Iran?
Wow. First of all, I can definitely imagine trust between Israel and Palestinians with Francesca.
That's why I didn't ask that question. I knew that answer.
Trust with Iran is difficult, and I think Hussein actually said it as well, which is on the one hand, we have had actions which threaten them, and they have spent the last 20 years with language that is threatening us. So how do you get beyond that? Both of us feel threatened by each other, and legitimately so. So where do you move from there? And so I think that honestly, I do think it's a real challenge. No time soon, they have to change their rhetoric. We have to change our behavior. I think that that's a difficult ask. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think it's really difficult.
The obvious question is whether the war was enough of an exclamation point to force into that difficult space. Hussein?
I believe there is a chance. First of all, we need direct negotiations between Iran and the US. Second, the issue cannot be single issue on nuclear, because I really do not believe the issue between Iran and the US is about a democracy or human right or even nuclear. The issue is about the region. Therefore, the US and Iran, they need to agree on one major principles. The Iranians, they would not harm the US interest in the region, and the US also would respect the legitimate and natural interest of Iran in the region. This principle needs to be negotiated, but first of all, they need to agree. The second important issue, I believe, is about Iran and Israel, and the most important principle is that Iran and Israel to stop threatening each other, the existence of each other. I mean, if there would be an agreement by President Trump on these two major principles, and then there would be negotiations based on international rules and regulations, the first issue should be and has to be about nuclear, because this has been negotiating for 20 years. And frankly speaking, JCPOA was the most comprehensive agreement during the history of non-proliferation, with the highest level of transparency, inspection measures, with the most comprehensive limits on the nuclear program, which no other NPT member has ever accepted, but Iran accepted. Nevertheless, we need to be realistic. President Trump does not want only JCPOA. He wants JCPOA plus. That's why it is for years, Alan, you know, we have been starting to write before JCPOA. In 2013, with Princeton nuclear scientists, we proposed a nuclear consortium in the Middle East. And in 2015, also, we wrote the next article. 2023, even in June, we wrote an article. We proposed a nuclear consortium in the Persian Gulf where Iran would have the centrifuges. Enrichment would be in Oman, a yellow cake, UF6, and the stockpile of enriched uranium would be in Saudi Arabia, and trade and the headquarters would be in Emirates. Therefore, in our proposal, there was not going to have any enrichment in Iran. It was before war. I mean, it was published even, I think, 2 weeks before war. That's why this could be JCPOA plus. I mean, Iran and the US, they can agree on JCPOA plus a regional consortium. If this is the principles on the nuclear, we would be able to go and pass the nuclear issue. And then, as I said, the two major issues would be for Iran and the US to agree on the regional issues, not to harm the legitimate or legal or the natural role interests of each other. And then would be about Iran and Israel. This has been, you know, Alan, you received my articles. Even 3 years ago, I wrote an article published in the Journal of Defense Ministry of United States that I proposed ceasefire between Iran and Israel, and I proposed there should be a mediation, and I think US is in good position to do this mediation. When Iranian and Israelis, they would agree that they should not, and they would not threaten the existence of each other, then they can see it. I mean, the US can negotiate to define the elements of such a principle. I think there is a chance if there is a goodwill.
Put aside the US for a moment because they're not represented here. Abraham, can you imagine the Israeli leadership working in the framework that Hussein just described?
Yeah, so I think what Hussein described is really amazing. The answer, of course, the current iteration of the government is no, obviously. I mean, this government is on its last legs. That means within a year. But for the moment, the answer is no. But Hussein's painting a larger, broader picture of a longer-term understanding. So whatever new government would come in, when there'll be a new government, the answer is quite possibly. In other words, any other government that's going to come in is going to look towards building bridges, towards creating other circumstances rather than the narrow worldview of this current government. So long-term, the answer is yes to your question. Short-term, the answer is absolutely not.
I agree with Abraham. Yeah, I agree.
Does there need to be, Hussein, going back to Iran, clearly there's going to be a shift in leadership sooner or later. As we just said, for Israel, sooner or later, Bibi is not immortal. He's been there 15 of the last 30 years. Presumably he's to the end of his time than the beginning of his time. Presumably the same thing is true in Iran in terms of supreme leader, who will be followed by someone. Does that change have to happen before we can get to this place where new possibilities can be explored?
See, Alan, really, no one knows what's going to happen after the current supreme leader. That's why I really prefer, if there is going to be agreement, it's better to have during the time of Ayatollah Khamenei, because he is very powerful. And if he decides, then the radicals in Iran would be quiet. Therefore, that's why he really didn't like JCPOA, but he agreed, and when he agreed, it was implemented correctly with zero failure for full 3 years. That's why it's better to use that, because I mean, the other very positive issue is that he really believes in his fatwa. Nuclear and all WMDs are haram religiously. I really don't know whether the next leader would believe the same religiously or not. I mean, because there are another school of thought that they are saying why Israel, India, Pakistan, everybody they have, why we should not have. And you know, Shah was after nuclear bomb also. And these are some opportunities, but no one knows, Alan, how long it would take. I mean, this has been discussing for decades, but Ayatollah Khamenei is ruling Iran for 35, 36 years, and we have had many changes in Washington, but he still is leader, and no one knows whether this would be 5 years, 10. It is in the hand of God. We need to use the opportunity currently, you know.
And I think that maybe will be the point. We've had this several years of war sequentially. The region has changed, just objectively, it has changed compared to what it was on October 6th. And the obvious question is, did it change for the better? Is there that possibility? Francesca, you've talked about youth and leadership. Abram, you've talked about life after Bibi. And Hussein, you've argued, you've laid out a possible framework that requires not just Israel and Iran to work together, but requires the Americans to play a positive role, which has certainly not been the case. How do we leave our audience with a little more optimism, a little more possibility? Is it? Can you guys imagine? Well, let me ask the question differently. Have we just seen the last war between Israel and Iran, or is there a next one?
No one knows if there would be a next war, because to my understanding, Prime Minister Netanyahu and even President Trump's assumption was that a big plan that they would bring a total collapse in Iran within 3, 4, 5 days. And this was really the original plan. And I think Bibi has had already promised President Trump that he's going to make it. That's why Trump gave a green light, NATO gave a green light, but it failed. And I think the level and the depth of damages to Israel has been also disaster for Israel, because the security of Israel has never been, after the wars in 1970 or 67, has never been challenged like this war. It was very bad for Iran. It was very bad for Israel, even for the US. And we all are monitoring the international public opinion, which is not in favor of Israel. We all understand. Even the public opinion in Europe, in the US, is against the Israeli behavior in Gaza or treating Palestinians. I think Israel is not winner at the end, because now there is a big fear in Muslim countries. I think before October 7, there was a good chance for Abraham Accord. And assuming if it would have continued, let's say Iran would oppose, but the other Arab countries, they would agree. But now there is a little chance, and I think those countries agreed even with Abraham Accord, they are under question in Muslim countries. Imagine about 2 billion Muslims are thinking and seeing the Gaza situation, where 2.23 million Palestinians are displaced. I mean, 60,000, or by Harvard calculation, 400,000 people, they have been killed, women, children. And as Francisca said, that it is completely leveled to earth. I mean, there is no Gaza. I mean, all these in long term has negative consequences. I think Bibi may be happy in short term, but I really don't believe this is not going to have a positive long-term consequences.
Abraham, and then Francesca, do you agree?
I don't agree. I think that I understand the issues that exist. If you look at where we were on October 6th and where we are today, Syria is a very different place. Lebanon is a very different place. The world is a very different place, and there are different opportunities that exist. The Palestinians, certainly what happened in Gaza is awful. And like I said, that needs a re-understanding of the world, holding our hands to make that situation better. But in general, the world has great opportunities that it didn't have, from the Abraham Accords, to just regional different shifting power in the region. So I think Syria is a great example of if everyone plays it the right way. Al-Shara is trying to turn towards being open to the world, and the world needs to be turned, including Israel, towards him. And that in itself is a different dynamic. So I think that if Alan had made a reference to the fact that, yeah, we sat in that bomb shelter during the Iran part of the war with the understanding that, hey, we're sitting here now because now after this, the world will be a better place. And we definitely see those opportunities.
Francesca, opportunities?
Yes, look at Syria. There are opportunities. At the same time, as Hussein said, the future is quite bleak for Israel, because the point is, if Palestinians disappear, as now, I mean, they're actually disappearing, they become something even more dangerous for Israel, like an abstract symbol of all the injustice, And Israel, you see it in Europe. And Israelis and the Jews after that, will be targeted, will be just, basically blamed for everything. And then there is, the other main victim, along the 60,000 dead of Gaza and all the Israelis who were killed on October 7th. The main victim for all of us is international law. So we got used in the past months, even before that, but especially, after October 7th, that basically, you do whatever you want to do, and there is no reaction. There is no, the International Criminal Court will pay a heavy price, for the arrest warrant against Netanyahu, which means, you will see the sanctions this has always been typical of international courts. Once there is a step forward, there are two steps back. There is no international law. So, and then from conflict to conflict, from war to war, you see basically there are no rules anymore. So suddenly Netanyahu wants to bomb southern Syria because he thinks, that something is going on, something going wrong with the Druze, and then, you bomb it. And nothing, and this is true in Gaza, this is true in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran, or the other way around, in Israel. And which is for the first time has been under missile attack. The world can't work this way.
It's hard to know where to go, except to thank you all for this. We've agreed that we need international law. We've agreed that we need leadership, and we have agreed that we need, if we're not going to honor the past, we have to invent a better future. But we're struggling with how, other than sitting in bomb shelters hoping that it's the last time in a bomb shelter, how we're going to do that. I certainly don't have any solutions to it. We've seen, and you've addressed most of the questions and comments we've got from the audience. There's clearly a desire for a better outcome, but I think we're a little frustrated. I think until we see this leadership logjam changing, certainly from the United States as well, but from, I think, all of the countries, hard to point to a great leader at the moment. So I think I want to end there, unless Francesca, Abraham, or Hossein, you have a last word you'd like to share.
No, thank you very much. It was great to see you and talk to you.
Abraham?
Yeah, thank you very much. We're good.
Francesca?
Well, I will be young and straight, so, at least Mahmoud Abbas is 90 years old. So, that's the positive news. We are close to change.
And on that positive note, thank you very much. And we'll do this again soon. Thank you.
All the best. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.